In the early months of 1943, near the battered landscapes of Tunisia, a captured German Oberst, a colonel of the Panzer divisions, stood before a massive Allied supply depot. And that's where things get interesting. He had spent years studying the art of armored warfare. He believed in the absolute supremacy of German engineering. To him, war was won by the sharpest blade, the thickest armor, and the most sophisticated machine. But here's the kicker. As he looked at what the Americans had brought across the Atlantic, his entire confidence completely shattered. He didn't see a breakthrough weapon. Mark this down. He didn't see a massive, terrifying supertank. Instead, he saw miles upon miles of identical wooden crates, thousands of standardized steel tracks, and rows of pristine olive-drab tanks that looked exactly the same. And it gets even crazier. They were being unloaded from ships not in dozens, but in hundreds, every single hour. The German colonel turned to his American captor, completely stunned. Listen closely to what he said. "We cannot defeat this. You do not build weapons, you build rivers." This is the untold story of the greatest clash of military philosophies in human history. And this is where it gets good. It wasn't just a battle between soldiers. It was a battle between two completely different ideas of how a nation should wage war. On one side, you had Nazi Germany. Their doctrine was built around the concept of Qualitätsarbeit, the absolute pursuit of technical perfection. But notice the flaw here. They wanted the heaviest tanks, the most complex engines, and the most formidable engineering that money could buy. They treated every single Tiger and Panther tank like a handcrafted masterpiece. Now look at the other side. You had the United States of America, a nation that looked at the battlefield not through the lens of medieval blacksmithing, but through the lens of Detroit. And that's exactly where the magic happens. The Americans understood a brutal, fundamental truth about modern conflict. War is an appetite that is never satisfied. It consumes steel, rubber, fuel, and meat at an apocalyptic rate. Here is the real secret. The country that wins is not the one with the most beautiful weapon, but the one that can replace its losses the fastest. When the German High Command first encountered the American M4 Sherman, they mocked it. But they missed the entire point. They called it names. They pointed out its high silhouette, its thinner armor compared to their heavy monsters, and its modest 75-millimeter gun. They thought the Americans were foolish, naive, and industrially primitive. They were dead wrong, and it gets even better. What the German engineers failed to realize, until it was far too late, was that the Sherman was never meant to be just a tank. Think about this for a second. It was a weapon system designed to be born in Michigan, shipped across dangerous oceans, thrown onto a beach, and kept running by a 19-year-old farm boy with nothing but a wrench and a manual. While a German Tiger tank required specialized mechanics, custom-made parts, and hours of delicate maintenance just to drive a few miles without its transmission exploding, the American Sherman was built to be practically indestructible. And here is the best part. It was reliable, it was predictable, and above all, it was endless. By the time the dust settled over the ruins of Berlin, German engineers didn't fear the tactical capabilities of a single American tank. And that is the ultimate twist. They feared the terrifying, unstoppable machine that created them. They feared the American assembly line. To truly understand why German engineers started losing sleep, we have to look inside their own factories. And this is where the contrast becomes mind-blowing. Germany was obsessed with building the ultimate war machine. They created the Tiger tank, a monster with 100 millimeters of frontal armor and a deadly 88-millimeter gun. But here's the catch. It was so heavy and complex that each one had to be practically custom-built. If a gear broke on a Tiger tank built in October, a replacement gear from a Tiger built in December might not even fit without a mechanic filing it down by hand. Think about how insane that is during a war. Now let's look at how America flipped the script. When Uncle Sam entered the war, American engineers at Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors sat down with a completely different mindset. And that's exactly where the genius lies. They didn't ask, how do we build a tank that can win a one-on-one duel? Instead, they asked, how do we build a tank that can be mass-produced by workers who used to build civilian sedans and then shipped across 3,000 miles of ocean? The answer was absolute standardization, and this is where things get really interesting. Every single bolt, every nut, every engine component of the M4 Sherman was built to exact tolerances. Pay close attention to this. If a Sherman tank got its transmission blown out in the mud of France, the mechanics didn't need to wait for a custom part from Detroit. They just walked over to a scrapped Sherman, pulled the transmission out, and bolted it right into the active tank. But here is the real kicker. It fit perfectly, every single time. German intelligence officers started intercepting American maintenance manuals, and they were absolutely horrified by what they read. Listen to this. While German crews needed highly trained technicians and heavy engineering cranes just to change a transmission, American farm boys turned soldiers were doing it in the middle of a field with basic tools. But it gets even worse for the German high command. Because the Germans couldn't mass-produce parts, their supply lines were a complete nightmare. A single German Panzer division often had to carry thousands of different unique spare parts just to keep their various vehicles moving, and that's where everything fell apart. If a Tiger tank's complex interlocking wheel system got clogged with frozen mud on the Eastern Front, the tank became a multi-ton sitting duck. Meanwhile, the American Sherman kept rolling. And here is the ultimate proof of American ingenuity. The Sherman was designed with a specific width and weight so it could fit perfectly onto standard American railway cars and Liberty ships. Mark this down. The Americans didn't just design a tank for the battlefield, they designed a tank for the global supply chain. When German engineers realized that the Americans were producing more Shermans in a single month than Germany could produce Tigers in the entire war, a wave of panic hit Berlin. And that brings us to the most shocking realization of all. By the summer of 1944, as Allied forces broke out of the Normandy beachheads, the terrifying reality of American industrial might hit the German high command like a freight train. And that's where the numbers become absolutely staggering. Germany had spent years perfecting the Panther and the Tiger, pouring fortunes into these steel beasts. But here's the kicker. In the time it took Germany to build just one single Tiger tank, American factories were rolling out over 20 fully combat-ready Shermans. Think about that ratio for a moment. Now look at how this played out on the battlefield. German tank aces would sometimes manage to knock out 4, 5, or even 6 American tanks in a single engagement. They felt victorious. But here is the real twist. The very next morning, those same German crews would look over the horizon, and there would be 10 more Shermans moving toward them. And it gets even crazier. The American supply lines were so efficient that destroyed tanks were being replaced faster than the Germans could burn through their ammunition. Let's look at the actual logistics behind this miracle. While German factories were constantly disrupted by Allied bombing raids, American plants in Detroit, Ohio, and Pennsylvania were operating completely unhindered, 24 hours a day. Pay close attention to this. The Americans introduced a concept called predictable manufacturing. They weren't just building tanks, they were building the machines that built the tanks. This meant that if a factory in Michigan needed to switch from producing automotive parts to producing tank turrets, they could do it in a matter of days, not months. And that is exactly where the genius lies. Listen closely to what General Heinz Guderian, the father of the German Blitzkrieg, wrote in his private journals. He openly admitted that the sheer volume of American equipment was something Germany simply could not compete with. And this is where things get really intense. It wasn't just about the quantity, it was about the relentless energy behind it. American factories were powered by millions of patriotic workers who treated the assembly line like their own personal front line. They knew that every bolt they tightened was a step closer to victory. But here is the ultimate proof of Germany's defeat. Toward the end of the war, German engineers were ordered to design new weapons using salvaged or simplified parts because their own industries were collapsing. And that's exactly where the irony lies. The nation that prided itself on over-engineering everything was forced to try and mimic the very mass production methods they had once mocked, but they failed completely. They lacked the raw materials, the energy, and the organizational genius of Detroit. When the war finally ended, the true verdict of history became undeniable. Germany had built incredible individual machines, but America had built the unbeatable system that won the war. Mark this down. The M4 Sherman, with its standard bolts, its reliable engine, and its endless supply, proved that American engineering wasn't just about firepower. It was about the unstoppable force of freedom and industrial supremacy. And that is exactly why German engineers were terrified of American mass production.